today I'm going to be talking about psychedelic organizational and community development. So I'm going to start off by just telling you just a little bit about me. So I am, like I said, I'm Sasha. I'm the Director of Development and Fundraising at the Mind Foundation, headquartered in Berlin. And we are a nonprofit scientific organization focused on promoting psychedelic science. And I'll go into more details on that, but that's kind of the little brief.
Can I check? Is that different to Mind, the charity?
Yes.
Completely different.
Yes. So just a little content ahead. First, I'm going to go over the different types of organizations, psychedelic organizations that exist today. Then I'm going to go into some of the factors that distinguish some of these organizations. And then we'll talk about some of the challenges that these organizations face. And then I'm going to use the Mind Foundation as a case study for potential solutions to some of these challenges. So first off, we have 5 different types of psychedelic organizations: general research organizations, psychedelic research-oriented organizations, organizations for professionals, psychedelic social clubs, and then comprehensive organizations. So first off, we have general research organizations. So these are organizations that are mainly focused on research that is related to consciousness, the mind and brain. They can involve psychedelic research as well, but don't necessarily. These types of organizations provide opportunities for discussions and networking for researchers and students. One example is the Association for the Scientific Study of Consciousness, which was founded in 1994 by Thomas Metzinger, who's a well-known neurophilosopher. He's on our scientific advisory board. And they host conferences, they have memberships for students, and they also give out a prestigious award called the William James Prize, which is awarded to consciousness researchers at the conferences that they host. So next we have psychedelic research-oriented organizations. So these organizations have a close relationship to academia, and they also offer networks and resources for students and scientists. Most of us here probably know the Hefter Research Institute, so they've been around for a pretty long time. And they're a good example of a psychedelic research-oriented organization. They fund and conduct research on LSD, and many other psychoactive substances. And they're also mainly run by professors, so that's something that distinguishes them from newer organizations like the Amsterdam Psychedelic Research Association and the Swedish Network for Psychedelic Science, who are these organizations, like I said, they're newer and they're mainly run by students and early career professionals. Next, we have organizations for professionals. So these organizations are mainly focused on practitioners and those who work in the, like therapists and medical doctors, psychiatrists, who work in the prevention workforce. And some of them have a focus on research and science, but others do not. One example of this is SEPT. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing it correctly, the Swiss Association for Psycholytic Therapy. So they're actually a group of practitioners, psychiatrists and therapists, and they're pretty well known for being the only researchers or therapists that have been working with LSD in the last 30 years. Some of the people who work with them have permission to work on a compassionate use basis. So that means that they can get special permission to work with people who have mental illnesses that are treatment resistant, or if they're at end of life. And I put this book cover right here. Mind's executive director, Dr. Henrik Jungeberl, he co-wrote this book called Therapy with Psychoactive Substances with the president of ZAPT, Peter Gasse. Next, we have psychedelic social clubs. So these organizations tend to be more for people who have a broad interest in psychedelia. They could be science-based, but not necessarily. Sometimes they involve researchers at the organizational level, but again, not always. And they also, some of them have experiential activities. So as you can see here, I have the Psychedelic Society in the UK. They have been holding retreats for truffles in Holland. So that's an example of a sort of experiential activity. The German Psychedelic Society, who Mind is close to because they're in Germany, they give lectures and also have community events. So yeah, there is a social component there as well. Then we have what's called comprehensive organizations. So these are organizations that incorporate at least two of the previously mentioned types of organizations. So MAPS and Beckley are very well known as well, and they're good examples. So, you know, they have research, they have opportunities for people to connect on the community level, they work in policy, right? So they cover a lot of these different sectors. And then Mind, who is also, we're only about 3 years old, so we're still a baby in that sense, but we definitely have multiple different types, which I will go into later as well. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about the factors that distinguish these organizations. Okay, so the first one is the relationship to science and research. So some organizations conduct research, some endorse them and fund them, and others reject them. So that is definitely a difference amongst these organizations. Another is whether you're an organization that has a strategic support for science or an authentic scientific attitude. So what this means is, if you're talking about a strategic support for science, are you conducting research because you want to have more studies to support policy and have kind of like a bigger picture? Or do you have more of an authentic scientific attitude and you're really looking into research for the sake of knowledge? Another difference is reflexive versus reductionist view of science. Reflexive is a scientific perspective that is incorporating the historical context of the study question. It's taking into account the researcher and results change over time, whereas reductionist perspective is more black and white, and a lot of times it's focused simply on one discipline. So maybe you're only looking at the neuropharmacological components, for example. And like I said, it could be transdisciplinary or single disciplinary in focus as well. Another factor that distinguishes organizations is their approach towards political and societal engagement. So are they transparent in their political and societal goals as an organization or their values? There are pros and cons to the level of transparency. Some pros are that if you are more transparent on the political and societal level, then maybe you'll be encouraging more activism. But then some cons are that people who disagree with you will be turned away from what you're doing. And then, of course, engagement in the general drug regulation reform versus just neutrality. Some organizations are more focused on policy in this sense, and it's a big part of their narrative, while others are not. So the next part is about the approach towards esotericism, religions, and spiritualities. So some organizations reject esotericism and spiritualities and religion in their narratives. Others have more of a scientific orientation. And also there's the matter of having a more secular approach versus transcendental. So secular meaning that you're attributing what you see, feel, and do more to your inner landscape, whereas transcendental is more otherworldly and outside of yourself. And then there's the actual forms of the organizations themselves. So is the organization hierarchical? Is it more network-like? Is there a membership model? Is it more person-centered, where there's one figurehead that is really important and the organization would fall apart without that person? And is the organization very focused on academic life or not? And then, like I said previously, is there a focus on self-experience? Because that can be a big part of the organization's goals. Okay, so some challenges that these organizations face. So given that they're all working in psychedelics, and psychedelics are illegal in most places currently, and not only that, but there's a lot of misinformation out there on psychedelics and stigma. The public relations and communications component is very important, and it can be a challenge for these organizations. And same goes for the politics advocacy component. Again, they're illegal, so there's a lot of work to be done on that front. Finding funding for these organizations can also be pretty difficult. Most of these organizations are funded by private donors. It's difficult to find grants that will help finance research, for example. And then, of course, there's a question of ethics, which is something that I will get into as well. And then in terms of the community development challenges, so we have the question of psychedelic cultural esotericism. So for some of these organizations, it's really important that they appeal more to the mainstream. So the esoteric component of psychedelia can serve as a challenge. Another, like I was saying before, is how we communicate the psychedelic experience, particularly to people who are stigmatizing it and people who have never had a psychedelic experience before. That can be a challenge for sure. And then last is diversity, exclusivity, and inclusivity. So as you can see, I have these different groups down here. We have academics, professionals, and lay people, right? So there's different types of people in our psychedelic communities. And so depending on what kind of organization you are, you're going to want to make sure that you have an understanding of to what degree, at what levels is it important to be inclusive, and what does exclusivity mean? Does it mean that you're excluding people? To what degree is that a pro and a con? I'm going to talk a little bit about how exclusivity can actually be a good thing, in the sense that you don't have to be excluding people. It can more just be seen as focusing on a particular group, and how that can actually be good for the group themselves. So for example, if you're more if your organization is more tailored towards researchers, it can be a good thing to have trainings that are dedicated towards researchers, talks that are dedicated towards researchers, for example. Okay, so now I'm going to go a little bit into the Mind Foundation. So these are some, I'm using, like I said before, I'm using the Mind Foundation as a case study for potential solutions to some of these challenges that I just went over. So the first area is related to, excuse me. The first area is related to public relations. So having a clear master narrative that is relatable and is targeted towards the groups that you're trying to target. Making sure that your media is in line with the message that you're trying to convey. And showing real people doing the work. Also having inclusive/exclusive events and resources, depending on what your organizational goals are. And I'll talk a little bit about how that fits in with Mind's goals and what we've done in particular. And also creating community amongst organizations themselves, having clearly defined values and ethics, and diversity in funding. Okay, so the first part is the master narrative. So as you can see here, it says the Mind Foundation is a European nonprofit organization for researchers, professionals, and friends. So here we're showing who we're targeting. We're showing, this is an example of the inclusivity component, where we're including researchers in our narrative, we're including professionals, and we're including the general public who's interested in the work that we do. We promote psychedelic science to build a healthier, more connected world. So the reason why I highlighted healthier and connected. Healthier is, these two words are mainly focused on the two sides that we as an organization see for the psychedelic experience. So healthier is more attributed to the mental health component and helping people who are ill, using psychedelics to help those people. And the connected component is, of course, this is a big word that the psychedelic community uses at large, but we have, this is on many different levels, connected to the earth, connected to each other, and connected to ourselves. And so, as you can see here, I have human development. That's a big part of our narrative. We want to highlight the ontological component of psychedelics and how they can help people with their existential development. So we have divvied up our mission into these 4 pillars to make what we do a little bit easier to understand. So the first part is research-oriented. So we support and conduct high-quality psychedelic research. We're actually in the process of applying for the first psilocybin depression study in Germany to be done since about 30 years ago. If you have any questions about that, please feel free to come up to me. It's definitely something we're excited about as an organization. The second part is related to education, which I will go into a little bit later as well. But we have different training programs, we have workshops, and we have talks. The third part, we work with policymakers. So we are in contact with the German government, talking about policy reform on the psychedelic level. And then last, we mobilize communities to encourage knowledge-based and risk-aware attitudes. As you'll see later, I'm going to talk a little bit about how community is a core value of ours. So this is highlighting that component. And we're also trying to highlight the risk-aware component. So that's, of course, talking about harm reduction. We want to make sure that people know about the benefits of psychedelics, but are also aware of the risks. This is some members of our team. We actually have a group of, well, we have a membership model of over 350 people and growing. But this is a group of our core staff members in March 2019. And I really just wanted to include this to talk a little bit about our process of, recently we've been reformulating our creating our mind brochure. And one of the things that we've talked about is how we need to make sure that we have people's faces, our faces in the brochure to show that we are proud to be doing this work. Next, we have the Mind Academy. So this is talking a little bit about the inclusive/exclusive events and resources that we offer. So the academic program has lectures and workshops associated with that use more technical knowledge. So people who are professionals, researchers who use a lot of scientific jargon, those tend to be more suited for those types of people. We also have Forum Bewusstseinskultur. Still learning how to pronounce that. But that Bewusstseinskultur means culture of consciousness. Thomas Metzinger, the neurophilosopher who's on our scientific advisory board that I talked a little bit about, he came up with that concept. And so this is our series of talks that we have on a regular basis, where a lot of experts come in and they promote this culture of consciousness and talk about some of the latest psychedelic science research. We also have professional trainings. We're working on creating professional trainings for integration therapists and building a network for integration therapists. And we also have a workshop called Beyond Experience, which is it's an psychedelic integration workshop where people can learn different methods for integrating their psychedelic experiences. And then last, we also have a conference, which is coming up in 3 weeks. It's called Insight. And that is an interdisciplinary conference. So the public's involved, scientists, researchers, professionals, all types of people will be there. And that's going to be in Berlin. So of course, if that interests you, also come up to me afterwards. Something that might interest you as well. So this is one of the workshops that we're hosting at Insight. It's called Cooperation or Competition, the Future of Psychedelic Science in Europe. So this is referring to what I was talking about earlier with creating community not only amongst the members of these organizations, within the organizations themselves, but also creating community between the organizations. So we have a few spots left in this workshop. So if you are interested in attending, please come up and talk to me afterwards as well. But as far as I know, I think this is going to be the first workshop of its kind where we're going to bring together leaders from different organizations and we're going to talk about how we can cooperate. Next, I have the Mind Foundation values. So it's really important to us as an organization that everybody is on the same wavelength when it comes to values. So whenever somebody comes in to work with us, we have a lot of members who volunteer with us. We make sure that they sign a code of conduct that has these values outlined. So it's really important for making sure that everybody is on the same page, like I said. There's basically 3 different, areas for these values. So there's professionalism. Again, that's very much tied to making sure everybody's on the same page, that we have a professional attitude in the work that we do, that we have integrity in the work that we do, and we're methodical. Next is connectedness and compassion. So this is making sure that we always remember why we're doing the work that we do. It's to help people and making sure that we remember that these important components of being connected to each other and to remaining connected to the work that we do and the people that we're serving. And then last we have innovation and community. So innovation is talking about how we don't want to be in this ivory tower above everybody. We want to make sure that we're integrated into the community and we're always in contact. And then I also just wanted to include an example of the code of conduct that we have, we have a couple of different code of conducts. This example is actually, we have an online forum for one of our workshops. So I took this from that forum. So you can see here, it says things like, do not engage in illegal activity, remember that you are speaking with other humans, be kind to each other. So again, just making sure that everybody's on the same page. And this is just outlining the different types of memberships we have. So we have memberships available to early career professionals and students, and the general public, which we call friends. And then we also have researchers and professionals. So different types of people can benefit from different types of memberships as well. And that's it. Thank you so much.